My name is Ben Kirshner, and the first professional experience I had with education was the opportunity to work in some summer outreach education programs in New Orleans, Louisiana, when I was a college student through a group that's now called the Breakthrough Collaborative, and at the time was called Summer Bridge. After that, that really awakened an interest in me in public education and educational equity, and also the joyful parts of being a teacher. So both the policy elements, but also getting to interact directly with young people and work with them. And my first job after college where I was really working full time as an educator was with the San Francisco Conservation Corps, which is a urban conservation corps in San Francisco, California. And I worked in a part of that group that worked with young people around urban environmental issues and leadership training and academic support. And that was a really important experience for me professionally, because the people I worked with were really high caliber young adults and educators. And we developed a variety of programs for youth in the Mission District of San Francisco, and also Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco, that were geared towards addressing some of the shortcomings that they experienced in their public schools. So these were mostly youth of color in San Francisco who were going to some of the weaker public middle schools in the Bay Area. And one thing I noticed by working in that program for 5 years was that we would have young people who came into our organization and would thrive and really grow up in this organization. They'd be there as 7th graders, and they'd come back as 9th graders and become kind of like mentors to younger youth. And we saw this thriving among many young people, but often they would struggle in school. And so I got curious as a researcher, or as a proto-researcher, and why might that be? Why might a kid be really successful in one kind of context and be struggling in school? The other researchy kind of question that I got from that professional experience as an educator was that I would see students actually thriving in our setting and thriving at school, going to some of the best high schools in San Francisco, like Lowell High School, which is a kind of a high-achieving magnet school in San Francisco. But yet, when they were done at those high schools, they hadn't actually taken all the courses they needed to be eligible for 4-year college, like San Francisco State or UC Berkeley. So they would get caught in the 2-year system in San Francisco. And for some, that was a vehicle to further education, but for many, it was more of like a trap that was very hard to get out of, taking remedial classes. And that seemed like a huge problem that I saw, is really successful, hardworking young people who weren't actually prepared for college because they hadn't even been offered the right courses in high school. So they had done everything right, essentially. So those two observations motivated my interest in graduate school and in doctoral work, where I studied at Stanford to do my PhD in psychological studies and education, I believe is what it was called. But always from the beginning, I had a strong interest in sociology and anthropology, and I took as many courses in those areas as well. But that's where I did my training. My current educational research interests revolve around questions about learning environments and settings for young people. And more specifically, I'm interested in understanding settings where young people have the opportunity to think about, critique, and take action about the environments they grow up in and how to improve those environments. So to give you an example, one of my projects, which is funded by the Spencer Foundation, is called Critical Civic Inquiry. And in that project, my colleagues and I work with teachers in Denver area schools who essentially integrate principles of participatory action research into their academic content. So you might have a literacy class, 7th grade literacy class, where students have certain standards they're supposed to meet around reading and writing and public speaking. But in order to meet those standards, the teacher is having students do research about the experience of undocumented students in Colorado and state policies around that issue, such as the asset bill that was being voted on last spring. And then students take positions on that issue and write letters to state legislatures. So that's an example of critical civic inquiry. And that's a kind of a classroom setting where I'm interested in young people not just developing traditional academic skills like reading and writing and math, but learning how to use those academic skills to accomplish social goals, to see the relevance of academics in their lives, to build their identities. as scholars, but also community-engaged scholars. So, so that's a school-based project I do. A second research project that I'm working on right now is looking at community-based youth organizing. And those are settings where community-based groups invite, recruit, engage young people from non-dominant backgrounds, typically youth of color and youth in poor and working class neighborhoods, to learn how to organize each other to build power in numbers and make changes that they want to see in their cities. So that study is an international study. Started out in the US, including sites in New Orleans, Denver, San Francisco, and Chicago, but it has expanded because of some interested international funders to include Northern Ireland, and South Africa. So we're really taking a comparative international look at different ways that community-based groups engage young people in political action. Those are two. Then the last study, for which I'm a senior researcher, is supported by the MacArthur Foundation, looking at connected learning opportunities for youth, and specifically using participatory research with youth to really understand what these rich connected learning environments look like. So those are some examples of the educational research I'm doing now.